This week's episode is another solo episode, a slightly shorter one, and part of my rambling reflections from the road series for the summer of 2023. I'm currently in Gunnison, Colorado, attending the Western Colorado University Masters of Creative Writing program with a focus on publishing. This week I'll share a few of the craft talks offered to the graduate students here that have inspired me, sharing my own reflections on those talks, the writing exercises I did, and with the hope you might find those prompts helpful. And for the sake of transparency, this opening for the podcast was produced by the AI voice of Mark Leslie Lefebvre from 11 Labs. But the rest of this episode is my real voice, crappy recording setting and all.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 317 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Today's episode, I am on the road again. I'm actually at Western Colorado University. I'm in the intense residency of the Masters in Creative Writing program with a focus on publishing. And so what I thought I'd do is share some of my rambling reflections from the road as I'm situated on this gorgeous, gorgeous campus, Western Colorado University in Gunnison, Colorado. And what I'm going to share is some of the notes, some of the reflections that I've made in the week so far. I'm recording this bit on Wednesday, but the podcast will be going out on Friday just as per normal. Because I'm at a higher elevation and I'm walking, you'll probably notice I'm a little bit out of breath, but that kind of comes with the territory. But what I wanted to share with you were some of the reflections based on my notes. And so there'll be snippets and bumpers and all the things as I divide things up and go through it. This episode is sponsored by the patrons of the Stark Reflections podcast. Those awesome folks. Thank you, everyone who support the podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. Patrons get access to additional content and material over on that spot. And I just want to say a huge shout out and thank you to all of my awesome patrons. Okay, so this very first reflection, more of an introduction still, is just why I decided to do this. Not just because I'm on the road and editing and interviews, a little bit challenging, but I'm, as I said, in Gunnison, and the campus here at Western Colorado University is absolutely gorgeous, as many university and college campuses are. But I'm recording this one from under a tree. There's a bird up top there tweeting, beautiful song at me, and the reason I guess I wanted to do this is no better place to reflect than when you're surrounded by nature and beautiful scenery and mountains, etc. But it's Wednesday, as I said, as I'm recording this, and Monday, Tuesday, just only halfway through the my week of classes here, and I've made some really interesting notes. And what I will be doing is reflecting on those notes. But it reminded me of something really important. It reminded me of the fact that I often let craft go by the wayside. Not that I'm not constantly wanting to learn and become better at writing, but in the morning, all the disciplines that come together. So I'm in the publishing discipline, and then they've got genre fiction and poetry, nature writing, and a screenplay. And we have a craft talk with all the groups together from somebody from one of the disciplines. And so far it's been absolutely inspiring and amazing, and I've made so many pages of notes. But I've also written some poetry, and I've written some prose, and I've written down books that I want to read, including, and I've never really read Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, but I'll be reflecting on some of those things and some of the other things that come up. But that's what you're kind of in store for as I continue. But at the point I'm recording this, my lunchtime break is almost over, and so I'm going to be heading back into the publishing classroom, and I'll talk at you soon right after that next bumper. So the first thing that I wanted to reflect on is related to one of the faculty craft talks that we had. So in the morning, all of the students, there's over 116 of us, I think, from all the various disciplines gather together. And shortly after breakfast, which we have in a common room, one of the faculty gives a craft talk. And on Monday, Maya, one of the faculty, did a talk on, it was a poetry talk, but this was specifically about the concept of outtakes, and she actually had us do some exercises during that time. The first thing she asked us to do is to write down a few images from your work that hold deep mystery for you. And to think about that, she quoted from Emily Dickinson, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant." And she was suggesting, offer the reader just a glimpse, or say the strange thing and don't explain it. So again, images from one of your works that have a deep mystery for you. And then she explained what an outtake was. And this is the images, the narrative, or other materials behind, well, in her case, the poem, behind the poem or that final image. And so the idea is you look at, so for example, I wrote something from my Canadian werewolf series, just talking about one of the things that holds deep mystery for me is Michael Andrews has no idea about his wolf lineage. This makes him sort of a lone wolf orphan. He doesn't know where he comes from. And then I thought this is perhaps a parallel to many of the mysteries he faces, like what he's doing when he's in that format. So you take that format and you circle the images. So you're looking at, the poem or the prose that you're looking at. You circle the images where you're going to take an outtake. And it's almost like hypertext, where you kind of focus on one word or phrase, and then you dig into that. And I thought that's an interesting thing to do. Taking those pieces and digging into them. So for an example from the opening of my novel, A Canadian Werewolf in New York, I wrote, "The early morning mist rising off the water revealed beautiful Lady Liber to me in teasing glimpses." Now that's related to the fact that things are hidden behind cloud, behind mist, etc. So taking an outtake from that, I used the phrase teasing glimpses. And I wrote the poem, "The only view, not completely dark, but also not seen, not visible, playfully elusive, ever on the edge of consciousness." So again, this was me taking the text of the novel, driving into it in a deeper way, just by taking that one phrase and expanding upon it. But expanding upon it in a way that creates new material. And so that here is the lesson that I want to share with you, is leveraging that to create something fresh and new that maybe expands upon the thing that exists. Now, here are some uses you can use for this. So this is some of the reflections. I'm actually looking at creating a series of poems inspired from the text of my Canadian werewolf books, the 6 of them that are out now. Because I already started with one and I've been playing with other ones because I just feel so energized and inspired to be around so many creatives. But here's an interesting thing you can do for that. And she suggested making footnotes in your fiction from those images. So imagine a special text available to your fans, your readers, people who subscribe to your newsletter, etc. Bonus content that is like those highlighted pieces of text that get into and explore something. Perhaps it's something you had to research for your work and weren't able to include. You research 30 pages worth of information, but you only include a couple lines that kind of dumb it down to the moment because it's not necessary for the scene. But for those readers who want those expanded details, that's something you can get into. And that's basically the first reflection from this week's notes that I thought would be intriguing to share with you. The second reflection, ironically, is related to poetry again, and this was from Tuesday's craft talk from Professor Steve Coughlin in the nature writing program. But basically the crossover of nature and poetry in a writer like Walt Whitman. He's a huge fan, so his lecture was entitled "Viva Walt Whitman: A Craft Discussion." And a couple of interesting takeaways is I've never really read Leaves of Grass, and so after hearing his talk, I'm quite inspired to check that out. He broke down and went into some of the mechanics of what Whitman did in some of his poems, Song of Myself, for example, and he explored the concept of cataloging, or of catalog, of basically listing some things. As a way to drive into depth or emotional resonance in writing. And even he shared one of his prose poems that he wrote, and we had parataxes. I have to look that term up, but I think it was parataxes is what I wrote down, which is short lines with a hard punch. And you think about a writer like potentially Hemingway that had a lot of short lines, and that's just to really hit home with the reader. And he expressed the graph horizontal and vertical, where horizontal is a movement in time, where things are happening over time in a narrative, and then the vertical is the depth and reflection. Of course, the depth and reflection that you're used to from this podcast. And so it was really intriguing to look at a poem with that in mind, to look at it with the horizontal, the movement of time, space and time, whatever, and then where it stops to dig into reflections, to depth, emotional resonance, etc. And one of the things that resonated really, really well is in Whitman, everything is amazing, and he suggests to just take a walk with that attitude, and enjoy not just the mountains, but the grass, everything that's around there. So the essay, the exercise that you can pull from this is that cataloging, that listing of items or ideas from an important moment. And what I did in this particular case is I thought about the last time I'd really been enjoying nature in a particular moment of quiet and solitude. And so what I did is I just sat down and started to record a moment where I was camping a few weeks ago, and I was by myself, and I was coming back from the restroom, and I stopped to look out over at the sun as it was setting over the water in the west. And I wrote, in this exercise, I stepped up to the edge where the grass, a mixture of greens and yellow stalks, trampled by human and canine feet, gave way to sand, rock, and the air. And I looked up and out, and inward, at the sun offering its last few rays of light and hope, at the relentless waves below, which I could hear crashing against the shore, far, far below, at the clouds that scattered like cotton candy across the blue and orange sky, at the moment frozen in time. And I looked up and out, and inward. And again, it's that journalistic writing of me trying to catalog the things I was seeing to try to bring you into the moment. And that's an exercise that I'm going to suggest you try for yourself. Again, following that advice, again, from Steve, just take a walk. Doesn't matter where that is, but walk with that Walt Whitman attitude that everything is amazing. And just look at something and catalog it with that attitude, with that appreciation. And that's my second reflection. So that's it for this episode and these reflections. It was a relatively shorter episode, again, because I am traveling. I'm hoping that some of the things that I've jotted down, talked about, learned about, I'm hoping that some of those things you found somewhat useful for your own writing. Maybe you've tried those exercises. Maybe you give it a try. If you do, please, let me know. Leave a comment over at the podcast at starkreflections.ca. I'd love to hear if you tried any of those exercises. And of course, for anything that you listen to in the podcast, always love to hear from you. Always love to hear your thoughts. Love to hear your reflections. So that's it for this Rambling Reflections on the Road episode of the Stark Reflections podcast. As I said, that's the end of this episode and these reflections. So until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomtech.com.